Okay, we're here today with three of the Pack children, Pack, Joann, Pack, Sutphin, and Bill Pack. And in addition to being involved in many activities in Blacksburg, like Smithfield and the Lyric, Habitat for Humanity, the Packs have been really active in developing. So our session today is to think about some of the things that have happened that led up to the development of Gable Shopping Center and the way their family remembers the beginning of that. So Bob or Joann, would you want to just give a little bit of history of your family? I know around Turner Street you all lived, and your grandfather or father had some property there on Turner Street.
Our grandfather was actually born where the coal pile is, and when when Tech took it over, he bought property down on Price's Fork Road, which is where Pack Place is now. My father and mother built a house, their first house, where Burger King currently sits. So we were all brought home from the hospital to that house and lived there till I was 10, Bob was 8 about, and Bill was 15. And then we moved out to a new development then called McBride Village, and that's where we grew up, in McBride Village.
And Pop was actually instrumental in that development too, and we still have the original site plan of that, which was done in the 50s, and he had 3 lots out there to begin with.
So how did your father get involved with Gables, and what was the reason for thinking about and beginning that? What do y'all remember about that?
Well, I remember him going to Charlotte. He had a friend in Charlotte that he'd worked with in Nolan Company down in Newport News. He was a plumber as well, and he saw the strip mall starting to come around in the 60s and thought it'd be a good idea to do one here.
What I remember is he had said that he knew all the women in Blacksburg went to Roanoke to shop, and why not have something like that here?
So was that, there were shops in downtown Blacksburg though at that time, weren't there?
But yes, just gift shops and one small dress shop, nothing like then a Leggett's.
What amazed me about the mid-60s and him able to get national tenants into little old Blacksburg at that time, which the population probably wasn't, the town population probably wasn't about, 7,000 or 8,000 maybe. And he drew national tenants in here, and had an anchor store of Leggett's, or the Belk store now, which was huge, I think, too, to bring all that in and to be able to finance it the way he did. So as we've done developments since then, it's hard to do that, and to be into Blacksburg, a little old town like that, I still don't know how he pulled it out. Just a piece of farmland that he had a vision for it.
As I remember, that land had belonged to the Joann family, and it was just a big field. And I remember different things than they do, but his office was in our house, and my mother, who had been a secretary at Tech, was his secretary, so she did all of his correspondence, and it all ran right there from our house. One of the other things that I remember, I don't know if they do or not, but we would sit around the dinner table at night trying to come up with a name for the shopping center.
Oh.
And one of the names that I remember he thought about was the Bazaar. But they had, apparently our parents had been on a trip to Florida and had gone to Coral Gables. And he came back with the shortened version, just Gables, the Gables Shopping Center. We were looking at some old stock certificates a few minutes ago that we've saved, and it was called the P&R Gable Shopping Center, and the R was for a distant cousin of his who lived here in town, whose name was Paul Reynolds. He did need some financing support when he got started, so Paul Reynolds was the one that he went to, and then later Kyle Robinson was involved in it,
That's right.
and then ultimately it was the
Cook
Cooks,
brothers, yeah.
Cook
family,
brothers.
Yeah.
So we were partners with all of them.
And it was built by Graves Construction. Charlie Graves built it, who did a lot of building, school. He did Margaret Beeks and also Gilbert Linkus. And then they were also in McBride Village next to our parents' house there. And so they did a lot of work together, both plumbing, electrical, and construction.
So your father was a plumber
Mm-hmm.
and had his own plumbing business.
Yeah, and it's amazing he had the vision he did to do what he did, not just with Gables, but other rental properties around town. He did Burger King, of course, in 1975. And then the Backstreet building there that's now Mellow Mushroom, he built that building at about that same time for a group called Angelo's.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first pizza place in town, I guess.
And his office, he was a tech graduate. He had gone to school, and his degree was in animal husbandry. And he did get to live at home because his house, he didn't have to go into the military part because he milked cows for tech. That was probably how he paid for his tuition.
Mm-hmm.
But he, after school, after tech, he worked at the powerhouse,
Mm-hmm.
and then he also worked for Nolan Company. I'm not sure the sequence of that. And I was telling Tom there was a letter that I've seen where Dr. Joann Burris was telling our dad that he needed to make a decision whether he was going to work for tech or have his own business, because he had started his own plumbing and heating business while he was still working at tech. And Joann Burris was telling him that he had to make a decision what he was going to do. And I do remember him saying that he talked to his father about it, and his father encouraged him to go on his own. And that was when he went full-time as a plumbing and heating contractor. And then sold that business to Boots Martin, right? Boots Martin, was well known here in town, and started developing. And that was probably in the early 60s, because Gables was like 63, 64.
Yeah.
I was graduating from high school, and
Yeah.
I remember the letters and the people coming to the house and to talk about what was going to go in.
We were doing a project on the corner of Price's Fork and Toms Creek later on in the 70s, exclusive of Gables, but we were going to put a bank on the corner of Price's Fork and Toms Creek, and I guess this was in the early 80s maybe, when the economy kind of tanked there, and the bank was out of Roanoke, and there was a regional bank, and they were going to put a branch there, and Pop was going to build it for them and then lease it to them. At the time, the banks weren't able to own their own property, so that was the plan. And those bankers would come to Blacksburg, and they would come to the house, of course, because that's where the office was. And one of them told me after Pop had died that they thought they were really some big-time negotiators. And until they got to the house, and Pop would be on the swing outside there and he said once they started talking to him and he was swinging back and forth, all of a sudden the playing field got leveled real quick, and then they would walk away and leave and go, what in the world just happened?
Because they didn't get their way.
Yeah,
they didn't get their way.
That he was a pretty good negotiator on that swing too, so I thought that was pretty funny about being there at the house. But back to Gables, one of the things when I got back here after being in the Army and was back in school, I would work out there before going to school at what I call janitorial engineer work, which I had a two-wheeler with a trash can strapped to it, and we'd go around with a stick with a nail in the end of it and clean the parking lot up.
You did some of that too, didn't you?
I'd
building.
wash the sidewalks down at the Gable Shopping Center.
Yeah, we did
Once
that.
a week.
We all
Yeah.
worked. We
Scrape
did
the
something.
chewing gum up.
Yeah, and then we did a lot of maintenance. Bill did a lot of maintenance out there. He'd call Bill, he was working
Lot
at
of
Federal Mobile,
plumbing.
and he'd call him and tell him, come by here after you get off work and fix this or that, so,
And you didn't say no.
yeah. And he would, I'm gonna have to get that phone here in a minute, maybe we'll have to stop. My phone keeps ringing, I'm sorry. Can you, yeah, can
Can
we
you
stop?
stop it?
Yeah,
Okay.
It's probably,
About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and he'd say, maybe down at the shopping center I got a leak or something needs to be done. And they got my boss got kind of tired of it. And he said, why do you tell your dad to wait till you get off? You punch out before he calls you.
Yeah. So did you pick up a lot of plumbing skills
Oh,
from
yeah.
your father? Do you do plumbing work too?
Yeah,
he has a natural instinct for
furnaces,
it.
water heaters, plumbing, hot water, boilers.
Yeah, boilers,
He
yeah.
taught me a lot of stuff.
Did you do that too, Bob?
No, not as much as Bill did. No. I remember too, thing that I picked up about my father was that he would pretty much ride around that center 2 or 3 times a day. And then he would call Bill or me out there to pick up paper around back, or he'd be on a tenant constantly that your trash can's overflowing type of thing. And I learned that if you can't ride around what you built at least once a day, you probably ought not own it.
No.
Because the way he did it, he was on top of it all the time. And if you're an absentee landlord, you can't do that. So that was one of the constant things in that old Jeep he had. He'd ride around it and see something and have us fix or have a tenant take care of, and he worried them to death. But they all liked him, and they respected him. And especially around time for rent, he'd be right on them to get it paid. But
So he'd go collect the rent personally?
well, for the local tenants, I'm sure he probably did. National tenants, they probably sent it right on in.
Yeah.
We had the apartment house at the Church Street Apartments up here. He built back in the 50s too.
53.
I was with him one afternoon, sitting there in the bedroom where his office was, and somebody called, and I was listening to a little bit of the conversation. It was one of the tenants, it was an older lady that lived there, worried about the heat or something, and he listened, and finally he said, which we can't do today, but he could get away with it back then. He said he waited till she finished talking, and he said, set the thermostat on 68, leave it there year round. If you get cold, put a sweater on. If you get hot, take the damn sweater off. And he put the phone down and turned back to what we were doing like it wasn't any big deal. I never will forget that one either. But we haven't been able to do that lately. He could get away with it though. He got away with it.
Was that a function of his personality?
Yeah,
Did he-
definitely. Yeah.
Definitely. We were, after I started working as a carpenter and builder, he had another fellow that would clean up out there for him, a guy named Carl Rose. And he was always worried about him showing up and doing what he was supposed to do. And he helped him a lot. But he went fishing one time down in Georgia, I think. He hardly ever went off. And he called me one time and asked me if I'd seen Carl Rose out there. And I started laughing. He said, what are you laughing about? I said, this phone conversation's costing you more than what you paid Carl. What are you worried about him for? And then I just heard a click. He was gone. I'm sure he laughed about it after he got off the phone with me. He didn't want to make me think he was laughing, but that was the way he operated. He thought like that all the time. He'd run to Roanoke to pick up a part that was cost him $2, but the gas cost him $1.50 or whatever. But that was that Depression era group that thought that way. And we've got things that Joann brought and little books that say, well, I saved $200 here or I saved $50 there by doing it this way instead of another way. But that's the way he thought.
You talked about Carl Rose, but what about Rogers? I have no clue what the man's first name was. He was just called Rogers, and he cleaned up. Rogers, remember?
Lived up on Clay Street. He was a World War I vet who went over with horses and took care of horses during World War I, and Pop took care of him. I remember taking Christmas dinner over to him one time that Pop put together for him.
But he would.
I don't remember his name. Rogers.
Rogers is all I ever knew, but I think he would walk out there to Gables and clean up, pick up trash. I remember seeing him with a bucket, and then if my dad was out there, he would take him home or to drop him off. And he lived right beside the little black church on
on
Clay Street.
Yeah,
up
just
here.
past that lot there that's open.
Oh, yeah, I remember him.
Yeah, always called
He
Mr.
drank
Rogers
what?
already.
He drank, he was an alcoholic, wasn't he?
Well,
I don't know.
he probably drank a little bit. World War I make you do that, I imagine.
Yeah.
If you made it back.
Yeah.
He was rough sometimes, but he would, as long as you didn't try to take advantage of him, he would help you. But if he sensed you were taking advantage of him, you better look out. He was going to straighten it out pretty quick. And people respected him for that.
Well, he must have been a pretty strong personality for.
Yep. Yeah, no doubt about that. But he was generous,
Very generous.
Again,
His family was important.
Yeah.
To take care of his family was very important. We never went without. We weren't indulged, but we didn't go without.
Yeah, I tell the story about that house he built in McBride Village. Was 1954, I think, or we moved in it 1954. Had air conditioning in it. And the house next door, Charlie Graves's, had air conditioning too, because they put them in together. We built the house at the same time.
Central air.
Yeah, and heat pumps, basically, the old version of them, they were huge. Now they're little old things, but
Weathertron.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right.
But that was the first one, if I recall, it was a magazine, one of the Heat and Air magazines that had him featured on the cover, saying that this was the first residential air conditioner on the Atlantic seaboard or eastern coast or something, I forget, but I remember seeing that magazine. He was standing out there on the outside of it, leaning up against it. So he was way out there. He was ahead of things. Did some solar things on that house. We had an uncle that was a ceramic engineer professor, tech from Christiansburg, and he designed the overhangs on that house based on where it's at and the way the sun came and went to help with the efficiency of the house, which, because I asked him about his really wide overhangs, which you didn't see back then, and now it's more commonplace. But he was quite an innovative guy to be, he graduated from Virginia Tech in 1936, but then he went into the plumbing business, which you don't think of a plumber being that had the creativity and the vision that he had.
Well, a graduate in animal husbandry and plumbing doesn't seem to go together very
Yeah,
well
that
either.
doesn't, and then get into development business after
His
that.
dad was over the plumbing shop at Tech, and he went to work with him. And he told me one time he was thinking about going to vet school
Yeah.
in Georgia. And he started helping with maintenance at Tech on the steam lines and all the pumps and the boilers. He just kind of fell into that. Forgot about the vet school.
So McBride Village, if you want to hear any of
Sure.
what we remember about that, it was our house was the last house on the street, Hutchison. So that was our playground.
Cul-de-sac right there.
We had there was a big field between us and Toms Creek Road, which was dirt at that time. So we had a baseball diamond out in that big field, and all the neighborhood kids.
Had a
would
high
come.
jump pit, sand pit down there with pole vaulted, high jumped.
And we
You
would.
kill yourselves.
Well, he
Yeah.
was doing that in high
It was
school.
the end of the road in the cul-de-sac. It was a perfect place for it.
Yeah.
So we'd get to run, and Bob and I would go way over now where off there was a old golf course. 460 bypass wasn't there, and we'd be all the way over near the Bros, the old Bros house, which is now a fraternity, our agricultural fraternity
On
house.
Toms Creek, yeah.
We could go over there, and he had actually put a dinner bell on the roof of the house, and there was a rope that came down through the attic into the utility room. And when Mother wanted us to come home, she would ring the bell.
You could hear it a mile away.
I bet that the bell's probably still there
I think
on the
so.
house. I don't know if it still has the rope attached to it, but
So
yeah, we were like the fourth or fifth house out there. There wasn't
Mhm.
many houses out there at that time.
and of course that was considered country, and all of our friends lived over on this side of town.
The bell's still there, isn't it?
I think so. And they wouldn't run us. You know, if you wanted to go to your friend's house, you had to walk. So I would walk from McBride Village to the old country club, town country club area where my friends lived.
Wow.
They weren't going to run us around. I
That
mean,
was a
gas
good
was.
hike.
Yeah, gas was 17 cents a gallon. You can't waste that. She'd go to town once a week, and that was it.
Well, in getting back to Gables, now, at some point, your family sold Gables? What was the deal with that?
Well, we sold it. The Cook brothers were still involved in it from Radford, and of course, Cook's Cleaners here in Blacksburg, Dick and his brothers and sister. We sold the center, and Pop was in the process of selling it when he died in 1983. We sold it shortly thereafter to a fellow in Tennessee that didn't do too well with it, and we were still guaranteed on the note, and it was 10 years left on the note. And basically at the 10th year, and I don't know if this fellow knew it or not, but he stopped making payments on the note, and I don't know that he knew that was a callable year. And so the bank called us and said that he didn't make his last couple of payments. We talked to him, and he said, well, he wasn't going to make any more until he got things straightened out. Then they called the note, so we had to go borrow the money to pay the note off, and then told the guy from Tennessee, either pay us back or what you owe us, and what you owe us, because he'd been paying along the way, or deed it back to us. And that's what he did. This was 1993, and then we redid the center and got Harris Teeter involved.
So at that point, Gables, from over that 10-year period, had gone from being fully occupied with
Pretty much.
business that was doing well. Leggett's was still there.
Leggett's moved out in 1985. That's when it went downhill, because the anchor store left, and then the rest of them started leaving after
The
that.
grocery stores left. Why don't you just maybe take a minute and describe what Gables included and what businesses were in Gables in the late 60s and 70s when it was fully occupied.
Okay.
We'll start over at Bonanza. Well, the bank were actually on the other side.
Corner, yeah, and then Radio Shack came in there in 75. That little piece there where used to be Marguerite's and
Marguerite's hair
still a
salon.
hairdressing place, and where CrossFit is now.
Yeah.
Radio Shack, they were built in 1975,
And that's all on the other side of Country Club.
but that was
Right.
part of Gables.
And that and
And
the
the bank on
bank,
the
which is
corner.
now a game shop.
Right,
Right.
That's all part of it.
yeah. And then you had
Bonanza.
Firestone. Well, Bonanza was a
Freestanding.
freestanding,
So it's
It's
right
not
on the
there now.
corner of Main, South Main, and
Pretty much. And
Country
then,
Club.
but there was a little shop for photographs or something. You could take your
yeah,
photographs.
that was in there.
That was first
Between-
and then Bonanza.
Yeah, then you had Firestone, High's Ice Cream.
Cave Whirl. Or
Yeah.
that
Yeah, there was a,
This, what year was this?
Scotty's is, remember Scotty's was one right there?
yeah, there was a pharmacist there.
No, well Scotty's
that-
was a,
Five and Down.
Five and
store.
Down.
GNY.
Yeah,
You remember?
yeah, then it became that. And then there was a bank in there, Riding Hardware was there. That was one of the initial stores. He moved from downtown out there.
oh, Krigler's Shoes
Yeah.
Yeah.
was in there.
Firestone.
Yeah, he said
Firestone,
Firestone.
Leggett's, and Sydney's out of Roanoke was a women's dress store.
And George,
Leggett's.
Dr. Forsman had
There was
the
a pharmacist there.
pharmacy.
It was a corner drug. They expanded out there. And then you had A&P and Sears and Micromack.
Micromack was a grocery store.
Yeah, A&P was a grocery store. Had two grocery stores that were same size. The way the leases for A&P were, you couldn't have another grocery store in there larger than the A&P store. So he did Micromack the same size. And they both thrived for a long time. And then you had Lindy's.
Lindy's. Well, something I remember about the grocery store that was on the very end,
Micromack.
it had a carport area, and you would drive in to that carport, and they would load your groceries into your car,
Yeah.
and then you drove off. I don't think I've ever seen that again.
That's where and then we enclosed that when we redid the center in the 90s, and closed that little section. It was about 1,100 feet there. It used to be a drive-through, and we made where the,
Travel agency?
yeah,
That's on the corner.
Mhm.
right on the corner, or the place where the edible flower arrangement place is, right in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there was a gas station, Texaco,
Mhm.
as an out partial, Bonanza, and then Lindy's, which was a old drive-through, 60s drive-through. So it was, and then he built a little bit, and one more piece there was an office space, and we expanded that in the 90s too. Picked up another 3,600 feet there.
And then the big lot behind it was part of it,
Yeah.
where now it's used as a
Rugby field.
rugby field.
Yeah, he had 30 acres altogether out there, which was unbelievable. 15 developed and 15 undeveloped. And then in the 80s, in the 2005, we sold the development piece to Kroger, and Jeannie Stosser bought the backland. So she still has that.
And more controversy arose.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was quite a center. It now has about 140,000 square feet. When he did it was about 130,
Oh,
which was huge. And Kroger now has taken over, a lot of it. They're the largest Kroger in the state of Virginia. Because when we did Harris Teeter, it ended up being 51,000 feet.
well, and did all three of you worked somehow on Gables when your father was building it and then renting it?
Well,
I didn't. I
What
was
was
off
this?
to, I was off to Radford.
You were going
Say that again.
All three of you worked somehow in Gables as it was being built, and
They did more than.
certainly after it was built.
A lot of
Because I
maintenance.
was in high school and my first job was at the A&P store downtown, where the drive-through is for Wachovia. There was a building there,
Mm-hmm.
Wells
and it was-
Fargo now.
Wells Fargo, okay. And then they moved to Gables, and I was part of that move in 1960, 65 or 66, somewhere in there. I worked there after school and on Saturdays. And in that summer, I worked construction on campus and then worked out there at nights and Saturdays.
And Bill was in the Navy then.
Yeah, I went on in the, tried to get in the firm and I didn't have enough math.
So he went in the Navy.
So did you go in the Navy to escape doing plumbing work with your father?
No, he actually,
Did you go in the Navy to escape doing plumbing work with your father?
Oh, no,
He
That
was
the Navy was before, I started in the plumbing. Of course, I did a lot of, I worked in engine rooms and boiler rooms on the ships I was on.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot of pipe fitting and
So you went in the Navy out of high school?
By the way, I can't hear very well today, too.
You went in the Navy out of high school?
right.
and
Yeah.
he actually would work, he was a diver.
Yeah,
And he would work
worked on submarines,
on the outsides of them,
Oh,
in the
wow.
water.
changing screws mostly.
So he would be underwater for hours at a time.
Not very deep.
It's
We use
underwater.
shallow water diving rigs.
And he was also in the Navy and in Cuba during the Bay of Pigs,
Oh, really?
which was kind of scary for us here at home because we were hearing all the reports and we knew he was there. But he got home okay.
Yeah, I was down there. I was just part of a crew member on a destroyer.
At Guantanamo?
Yeah, been there. Yeah, I was in a swimming pool down there I think it was a Sunday afternoon or Saturday. Bunch of us went over to the swimming pool on the base. This sailor came around on a bicycle. Everybody get back to the ships. We're getting underway.
Oh, wow.
There were probably 20 or 25 ships down there then. A lot of them were anchored out. So we grabbed our clothes and went down to the pier. The boat picked us up. That was the beginning of the Bay of Pigs.
What did your father do after Gables? Did he do another big development?
Well, he did Burger King and Backstreet's there in 75.
And then Pack Place.
Pack Place he did in 79, 80 apartments.
That had been
And
where he
that's-
grew, where his family lived, his father's farm. And actually, it was 18 acres in there. We were looking at the map the other day. He actually owned all of the property where the edge is,
Jeannie's property.
over to Cambridge Street. And after our step grandmother died, he had to sell some of it because he had siblings, and to divvy up the estate. And he kept that acre. I don't know how much acreage is there.
Wasn't much, yeah. Probably
Where the
less than
apartments were built. And then Bob built the Pack building later, right?
that. Yeah, well, Bill and I built Pack Bill in 1987. But I guess apartments were probably his last project that I can think of.
The what?
The apartments, Pack Place.
What about them?
The last project he did.
No, it was an office building. Well, no.
You don't, oh, I was gonna mention
The
too.
apartments are already there, weren't they?
When Pop's last project was the apartments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When he was in the plumbing and heating business only, his office was where Tom Kuntz's building is now. The bottom part was his office, showroom, and there was a garage where he kept a lot of tools and pipe fittings and things,
And he sold
The trucks were in there.
appliances.
and trucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sold appliances in there. I've given you all a picture of that building. And upstairs were 2 apartments. And Curtis Gray, who was the principal of the high school, his parents lived up there for years in one of the apartments.
Well, it's remarkable the kind of impact that those developments have had. I mean, you're talking about your father being visionary and innovative. And it seems like that's had a big impact on Blacksburg. That was probably the first time any business went out of the central business district.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, much later, the university mall was developed.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you know, so much of that back then was about parking. You know, it's so much you can park right there and walk in.
Yeah.
Downtown, you could park on Main Street, which we've narrowed Main Street down so now, but you used to be able to park on both sides of Main Street, but still it was parallel parking and very limited out there. You know, I can't remember how many we had. It was probably 200 spaces out there when he first built that, which is just hard to imagine.
Yeah.
And then that was the trend, and it's continued on. And now the big boxes are taking over, but that's the way they all evolved from downtowns to that. Now we're trying to revitalize the downtowns to make up for it.
Build parking structures.
Yeah, now everything's vertical.
Yeah.
And the interesting too on Gables, that just I might add real quickly, is that when we redid it in the 90s, the trend was that instead of having supply rooms or storerooms like all those stores out there did, they had wide display rooms and then a stock room behind for they could bring stuff out. Well, in the 90s we learned that everybody wanted more narrow stores because they could UPS stuff in quickly and not have much of a stock room. So that strip mall and the ones built in the 60s have all changed too to accommodate people's needs, because the display area is your supply room as well. The only thing in the back now is maybe an office and a bathroom and a small utility room possibly. And so we had to redo Gables to fit that new models in the 90s after, well, that was 30 years later.
Yeah. You tore down a significant part of Gables when you redid it, didn't you?
We tore down 3.5 stores to put Harris Teeter in there. Yep, and I got a lot of heat over that. The guys that were sitting at the Hardee's across the street watching us and wanting to know why I did what I did, and because they thought I shouldn't have taken the roof off, and then they got mad because I pulled the slab up, and I said, well, you know, when you're converting a retail store, a clothing store into a grocery store, and you got all the under slab work you got to do for a grocery store, there wasn't any sense of trenching that floor. It was better to take it all out. Oh, well, we'd have done it different if we'd been doing it. I said, well, you're not doing it, we're doing it here. You know, but that was a bunch over there that watched us every day.
Nice to have good advisors.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially when they just sat there and drank their coffee and complained about it. But it worked out pretty good. Harris Teeter is a good company.
Joann, do you have any final memories?
Well, I was thinking maybe I should explain his name,
Okay.
because it was unusual.
Yeah, I don't think we mentioned
His name. His name was William French Pack, and Bill is the third. But French Pack was what he was called, and that's kind of an unusual name. But I'm the history buff of the family, and the Packs were from Giles County originally, and Samuel Pack married Harriet French, so it was a surname several generations back. And my understanding is that Samuel Pack wanted his children to go to Virginia Tech, which would have been our grandfather. And so he moved to Blacksburg for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my grandfathers, and I guess I really am not sure about our grandfather, who was William French Pack Sr. I guess he went to school, but I don't know that he graduated from Tech. But one of his brothers was the town doctor, Dr. Henry Pack. And his house at one time was actually what is now the social house. And if you'll look at that building, there are two front doors. The reason is the door on the left was his little office. So, and then there was another brother within that family who didn't live here. We never knew him. And then there were several sisters. One was Clara Carrier, whose husband taught agronomy at Tech, and she lived on Draper Road. And then the other two were lived on the property where Pack Place is, in an old house that has since been torn down. So it was a large family, but that's how the Packs got from Giles County to Blacksburg.
No, it's interesting.
Mhm.
You move around.
Mhm.
Bill, do you have any final thoughts?
No, they pretty well covered it. I just,
He'll think of things after we've
Yeah,
stopped
we-
talking.
Huh?
You'll think of things after we've stopped talking.
yeah,
Well, thank you all so much. This is an important part of Blacksburg. It's great to have you all here, and hopefully we'll see this soon.
Yeah, thanks,
We
Tom.
appreciate it, Tom, thank you.